All right, so we're diving into David and Goliath by Malcolm Gladwell today, and we've got this great summary to work from. I think this is really going to resonate with you, especially given your interest in, well, history and how societies change.
Yeah, it definitely makes you think about like those moments when the underdog, the one everyone thinks is going to lose, actually ends up on top. Gladwell, he really digs into like how that's even possible.
And he kicks things off with this story about a basketball coach, Vivek Ranadive, who, get this, knew absolutely nothing about basketball. But he ends up coaching his daughter's team, Redwood City Middle School, and they go all the way to the national championships. It's crazy.
It's wild, right? And that's exactly what Gladwell's getting at. Like Ranadive's lack of experience, it actually becomes his biggest asset. He doesn't come in with all those preconceived notions about how the game should be played. So he's willing to try something totally different.
Yeah, like a full court press, which most coaches would say is way too aggressive for middle schoolers. It's going to wear the kids out.
But Ranadive, he sees it differently. His team, they're not the most skilled, so he has to disrupt the game somehow, right? Force the other team to play on his terms. He has to turn the tables.
It's like classic underdog strategy, right? Think about David and Goliath. David had to find a way to completely catch Goliath off guard. He couldn't win by playing by Goliath's rules.
Exactly. He had to use his size, or lack of size, I guess, to his advantage, be nimble, be unpredictable. And Gladwell, he doesn't just stick to sports analogies. He brings in research from this political scientist, Ivan Eraguntoft, who studied wars, like over the last 2 centuries. And guess what he found?
Well, don't leave me hanging.
He found that smaller, weaker countries, they actually win more often than you'd expect. And the reason? They're willing to break the rules, to fight dirty, to do whatever it takes to win.
So it's like, in a way, being the underdog can actually be an advantage.
It can be,
Hmm.
but it takes a certain kind of mindset, right? You have to be willing to challenge the status quo, to think outside the box. And that can be hard, especially when everyone around you is telling you to play it safe, to stick to the script. Makes you wonder, how many times do we hold ourselves back because we're afraid to break the rules,
Oh.
to try something different? What do you think? Have you ever had an idea that went against the grain, but you were hesitant to go for it?
Oh, absolutely. All the time. But Gladwell, he doesn't just stop there. In chapter 2, he dives into the story about Teresa DeBrito, who was a principal at Sheppard Valley Middle School. And they were dealing with declining enrollment, which led to like really small class sizes.
And most people would assume that smaller class sizes are a good thing, right?
Yeah.
More individual attention from the teacher, better learning outcomes.
Yeah, that's what we're always told. Smaller classes, better education.
But Gladwell throws a curveball. He brings in this research from this economist, Caroline Hawksby, who found that there's actually no significant difference in learning between large and small classes.
Really? So all this emphasis on smaller class sizes, it might not even matter that much.
Well, Gladwell, he points to this idea of an inverted U-curve. Basically, there's this optimal class size, and going too small can be just as bad as having too many students. It's not a simple equation.
So it's like with David and Goliath. Bigger isn't always better, but smaller isn't always the answer either.
Exactly. It's all about finding that sweet spot, right? Where the resources, the environment, everything aligns to create like the ideal conditions for learning. But this idea goes way beyond education. It makes you think, are there other areas in life where we make these assumptions about what's best without really, really digging deeper, questioning whether it's actually true?
It's like we get so caught up in these simple formulas, Like if we just do X, then Y will automatically happen.
And sometimes those simple formulas, they lead us astray. Gladwell even talks about how wealth, something we usually think of as a good thing, can actually create its own set of challenges. He tells this story about a Hollywood executive who's worried that his wealth will make it harder for his kids to develop a strong work ethic.
Wow, that's interesting. You'd think having all those resources would make things easier, not harder.
But this executive, he sees it as the potential disadvantage. Because when everything's handed to you, you don't have to struggle. You don't have to develop that grit, that resilience that's like so essential for success.
Right, you don't learn how to overcome obstacles, to bounce back from setbacks. And speaking of resilience, in chapter 3, we meet Carolyn Sachs. She's this bright student who loves science, gets into Brown University, which is a huge accomplishment, but then she really starts to struggle.
And what's fascinating is it's not because she's not smart or capable. She's surrounded by other brilliant students, and it starts to make her feel inadequate.
Yeah.
Gladwell calls this the big fish, little pond effect.
So instead of feeling confident, she starts to doubt herself. Even though she's at this prestigious university, she's working hard. It's backfiring.
Yeah, she's constantly comparing herself to the very best, and it makes it hard to see her own strengths, her own progress. It hits her especially hard in organic chemistry, which was like her passion. It makes her question her whole future in science.
It's like that saying, comparison is the thief of joy, but it can also steal your motivation, your confidence, your sense of self.
And Gladwell, he compares Caroline's experience to those impressionist painters who were initially rejected by the Salon, which was like the most prestigious art exhibition in France at the time.
Oh, yeah. But they didn't give up, did they?
Not at all. They created their own exhibitions and ended up revolutionizing the art world. It makes you wonder if sometimes being underestimated, being overlooked, can actually be the spark that ignites your creativity, that drives you to achieve even greater things.
It's like you need to find the right environment, the right pond, where you can truly thrive, where your unique strength can shine through. Not everyone is meant to be in that cutthroat, hyper-competitive environment.
Exactly. Success is relative, right? And we get so caught up in measuring ourselves against those around us that we forget to appreciate our own progress, our own unique talents. And speaking of unique talents, in Chapter 4, we meet David Boies, this incredibly successful trial lawyer who, as a child, struggled with dyslexia.
Dyslexia, that's a learning disability that makes it really hard to read and process language. It can be incredibly challenging. But Boys, he didn't let it hold him back.
No, he didn't. And this is where Gladwell introduces this idea of desirable difficulties. Basically, he's saying that sometimes those challenges we face, they can actually force us to develop other skills, sometimes to an exceptional degree.
So, in a way, what we perceive as a weakness can actually become a strength.
That's the idea. In Boyce's case, because he had to work so hard to overcome his reading difficulties, he became this incredibly attentive listener. And that ability to really listen, to cut through the noise and get to the heart of an argument, it was essential in his career as a lawyer.
Wow. So what he perceived as a weakness, his dyslexia, actually helped him develop the very skills he needed to succeed. That's incredible.
And Gladwell, he points out that there are a surprising number of successful entrepreneurs who are dyslexic. Richard Branson, Paul Orfalea, the founder of Kinko's, the list goes on.
That's amazing. But what's the connection between dyslexia and, like, starting a business? What's the link there?
Well, Gladwell suggests that dyslexia can foster this willingness to take social risks. Think about it. If you've spent your whole life overcoming challenges, defying expectations, you might be less afraid to step outside the norm, to try something bold.
And entrepreneurship is all about being bold, right? Seeing opportunities where others don't, taking that leap of faith.
Exactly. Gladwell even tells the story of Gary Cohn, who rose to become the president of Goldman Sachs despite being dyslexic. He believes that his dyslexia actually helped him develop the resilience and grit he needed to navigate that world. It's a pretty powerful example.
It really makes you think, right? What we often perceive as a limitation, a disadvantage, can actually be a source of strength, even something like dyslexia.
And it leads us to Chapter 5, where we delve into the life of Emil J. Freireich, a doctor who, revolutionized the treatment of childhood leukemia. But his story, it starts with hardship, real hardship. He grows up in poverty during the Great Depression, loses his dad at a young age.
So these early challenges, these difficult experiences, they might have actually shaped his drive, his resilience. It's hard to imagine going through something like that.
It is. And I think Gladwell's careful not to suggest that trauma always leads to success, but there's definitely evidence that overcoming adversity, especially early in life, can have a profound impact on an individual's outlook, their determination. It can forge this inner strength that carries them through future challenges.
It's like they've already faced some of life's toughest battles, so they're not afraid to take on new ones. They've developed that fighting spirit.
And Freireich, he definitely had that fighting spirit. He was known for his fearless approach, his willingness to challenge conventional wisdom in the medical field. He wasn't afraid to push boundaries, to try new treatments that others thought were too risky.
And it sounds like those risks paid off, right? He made some truly groundbreaking contributions to medicine.
He did. And I think it's a good reminder that even in the face of seemingly impossible odds, we have this capacity for resilience, for innovation. We can find ways to overcome those challenges and create positive change.
It's inspiring, to say the least. It's like those personal struggles can fuel our greatest achievements, even if we don't realize it at the time.
It's about perspective, right? Seeing those challenges not as setbacks, but as opportunities for growth, for learning, for becoming even stronger. And speaking of challenging perceptions, in Chapter 6, were transported to the heart of the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chapter 6, this one takes us right into the thick of the civil rights movement. Gladwell really zooms in on Birmingham, Alabama, back in 1963, paints this super vivid picture of the fight for equality. And there's this one moment he focuses on him. Well, it became iconic. It's a young black teenager being attacked by a police dog.
Yeah, that photograph, I remember seeing it in like history books. Just so powerful. It really captures the brutality, the hate that was so prevalent back then. It's hard to believe that kind of stuff was happening in America not that long ago.
Yeah, no kidding. And Gladwell, he lays out the context.
Yeah.
And Martin Luther King Jr., his movement, it was facing huge resistance in Birmingham. The city had this reputation, for being really opposed to integration. It was a real David versus Goliath situation. These activists going up against like this whole system designed to keep them down.
And that's where Wyatt Walker comes in, right? Gladwell talks about him as like King's right-hand man, this brilliant strategist.
Yeah, he was something else. Gladwell portrays him as this cunning tactician. Walker, he saw the whole struggle through this really specific lens, the lens of the trickster hero from folklore. That figure who uses wit and cleverness to outsmart a stronger opponent.
So he was like playing chess, not checkers.
Exactly. He knew that trying to go head-to-head with someone like Bull Connor, Birmingham's Commissioner of Public Safety, it just wouldn't work. Connor was notorious for his brutal tactics against protesters.
Yeah. Yeah, his use of fire hoses and police dogs against peaceful protesters. It's sickening. It really shows how far we've come as a society, but also, how much further we still have to go.
No doubt. But Walker, he actually saw Connor's brutality as an opportunity. He developed this plan, Project C, a series of demonstrations designed to basically provoke a reaction from Connor and the police.
He was like trying to get them to overreact, to show their true colors.
That's it. He knew that if Connor unleashed his violence on these peaceful protesters, especially children, it would be captured on film. It would be broadcast to the world. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, those images, they really shocked the nation. They helped turn the tide of public opinion, in favor of the civil rights movement.
It was risky, no question. There was definitely debate about it, even within the movement itself.
Yeah.
But it was effective.
It's like, in a way, he used Connor's own brutality against him, turned it into this weapon for change. It's fascinating, but also kind of disturbing.
It is. And I think Gladwell's point is that these situations, they're complex. There are no easy answers when you're fighting for justice. Sometimes you got to use unconventional tactics, even ones that might make people uncomfortable.
It makes you think about the choices leaders have to make, the weight of those decisions. But moving on to Chapter 7, we find ourselves in a whole different conflict. Northern Ireland, 1969, at the start of the Troubles, a really turbulent time.
Yeah, and Gladwell introduces us to Rosemary Lawler, a Catholic woman living in a Protestant neighborhood in Belfast. She and her family, they end up having to flee their home after a bomb almost explodes in their backyard. Imagine that.
It's terrifying. Just highlights the deep divisions that were tearing Northern Ireland apart, just neighbor against neighbor.
It was a rough time. And Gladwell describes how the British Army, led by General Ian Freeland, they were trying to quell the unrest with this policy of like strict control. They based it on this report called Rebellion and Authority. They thought, showing force, maintaining order, that was the key.
But that didn't really work, did it?
Nope, not really.
Huh.
Gladwell, he makes this interesting comparison between the British Army's approach and a poorly managed classroom. When a teacher just relies on authority, on control, without building trust, without understanding, it often backfires.
So the students, or in this case, the citizens of Northern Ireland, they rebel.
They do. It's like, you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. And Gladwell, he contrasts this with a program in Brownsville, New York called JRIP. That stands for Juvenile Robbery Intervention Program. Instead of just relying on traditional policing tactics, JRIP, they focused on community engagement, building relationships with at-risk youth, trying to address the root causes of the problem.
So it was more about like prevention than punishment.
Yeah, exactly. And it turned out to be much more effective. It shows how important it is to build legitimacy, to build trust within a community. You can't just impose order from the outside.
It's like you need buy-in from the people you're trying to govern, to protect. You need them to see you as legitimate, not just as an occupying force.
That's a great point. And unfortunately, in Northern Ireland, the British armies, their heavy-handed tactics, they actually just made things worse. led to more violence, more distrust. Rosemary Lawler, she saw this firsthand, culminating in the death of her brother during a British Army crackdown. Really tragic.
It's heartbreaking, just a stark reminder of the human cost of these conflicts, of the unintended consequences when we misunderstand, the dynamics of power and authority. But shifting gears a bit, Chapter 8 takes us to two really powerful stories about families dealing with the unthinkable, the loss of a child.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine a more devastating loss. And Gladwell presents these two families who take very different paths in their grief, their search for justice. We have Mike Reynolds, his daughter Kimber, she was murdered in California.
And his grief, his anger, it fuels this fight for tougher sentencing laws. And it leads to the passage of California's three strikes law, a
Yeah.
really controversial law.
Yeah, it mandated these much longer prison sentences for repeat offenders, even for nonviolent crimes.
Hmm.
Reynolds, he was convinced that it would deter crime, that it would prevent other families from going through what he had to endure.
So it was about like punishment, about making sure that criminals paid a heavier price for their actions.
Yeah, but then when you have Wilma Dirksen, her daughter Candace, she abducted and murdered in Canada. And the Dirksons, they go in a completely different direction. They choose forgiveness. They seek understanding instead of retribution. It's really remarkable.
It's incredible, that kind of strength, that kind of compassion in the face of such unimaginable loss. It's hard to even fathom.
It's really powerful. It makes you question, what is justice? Is it about punishment, or is it about healing, about understanding?
Yeah, what does justice actually look like? It's a complicated question.
It is. And Gladwell, he brings up that inverted U-curve concept again.
Mm.
He suggests that, there's a point where increasing punishment, it might not actually lead to less crime.
So maybe Reynolds' push for harsher laws, it didn't actually have the intended effect.
It's hard to say for sure. And I think Gladwell's not trying to give us any easy answers. He's presenting these two contrasting stories to make us think about the different ways we respond to tragedy, the different ways we seek justice.
And there's no right or wrong answer, is there? It's so personal, so individual.
And I think that's part of Gladwell's point. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. What works for one person might not work for another. But the Dirksen story, it's particularly powerful because their forgiveness, it wasn't just a one-time decision. Years later, when Candace's murderer was finally caught, they had to confront their feelings all over again, and they chose forgiveness again.
Wow, that's amazing. It shows that forgiveness, it's not just a feeling, it's a choice. It's something you have to actively practice even when it's hard.
Yeah, it's an ongoing process, but it's a powerful testament to the human capacity for healing, for growth. Even in the face of the darkest, most horrific acts, there's still this possibility for redemption,
Yeah.
for finding peace. But shifting gears again, Chapter 9 takes us back in time to World War II, to Nazi-occupied France. We meet André Trocmé, a Protestant pastor in this small town called Le Chambon-sur-Lignon. And he and his community, they risked their lives to shelter Jewish refugees.
Yeah, it's an amazing story of courage, of compassion, just this small town standing up to this huge evil force.
It is. And Trocmé, he was incredible. He refused to comply with the Vichy government's anti-Semitic laws, even little things like refusing to do the fascist salute.
Right.
He believed that his faith demanded resistance, even if it meant putting himself and his whole community at risk.
And his community, they followed his lead. They hid these refugees in their homes, helped them escape. They constantly outwitted the Vichy police. It's inspiring, to say the least.
It is. And Gladwell, he points out that Le Chambon's history, it played a role in their willingness to resist.
Yeah,
They
it
had been
does.
persecuted themselves, as Huguenots, this Protestant minority in France. So they knew what it felt like to be targeted, to be marginalized.
So they had this empathy, this understanding of what these Jewish refugees were going through. They couldn't just stand by and do nothing.
Yeah, they saw themselves in these refugees.
Yeah.
And they decided to act, even though it was dangerous. Trocmé's story, it's especially powerful because during this time, he also experienced a deep personal loss. His son died. And yet he still found the strength to help others, to continue resisting.
It's remarkable. He channeled his grief, his pain into action, into compassion. It's really a testament to the human spirit. And I think Trocmé's story really embodies the central theme of David and Goliath, that even when the odds are stacked against you, you can still make a difference. You can still find the courage to stand up for what's right.
Yeah, and Gladwell, he's really challenging us to think about our own lives. what are our Goliaths? What are the challenges we're facing? And how can we find that David spirit within ourselves, that courage, that willingness to fight for what we believe in, even when it seems impossible. So we've seen how underdogs, those facing these massive obstacles, they can actually flip the script, turn those disadvantages into strengths.
Yeah, I mean, from those surprising basketball strategies to the unexpected challenges of wealth, Gladwell, he's really taken us on quite a ride, hasn't he? A real roller coaster.
He has, and he's really pushed us to question what it means to succeed, right? I mean, we saw how a learning disability, dyslexia, can actually foster these incredible strengths, and how entire communities can come together to resist oppression, even when facing, enormous risks.
Now, what really stuck with me is this idea that our struggles, the things that we often see as weaknesses, they can actually fuel our drive, our resilience. They can push us to achieve things we never thought possible.
It's like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah.
But Gladwell, he goes deeper. He shows us how those challenges, they can actually become the source of our greatest strengths, the things that set us apart.
Yeah, and he kind of brings it all home in this final chapter where he asks us to think about how we define success, how we measure our own lives. And I'm curious for you, what were your biggest takeaways from David and Goliath? What really resonated?
Hmm. That's a good question. I think one of the biggest things for me was this idea that we often underestimate the power of those perceived weaknesses. What we might see as a disadvantage, it could actually be a hidden advantage, a source of innovation, of resilience, maybe even a catalyst for social change. It's all shifting our perspective, looking at things from a different angle.
Yeah, it's like we get so stuck in these binary ways of thinking. Advantage versus disadvantage, winner versus loser.
Yeah.
But Gladwell, he's saying it's much more nuanced than that.
It is. He's encouraging us to question those assumptions, to challenge conventional wisdom, to recognize that the path to success, it's rarely a straight line.
It's more like a winding road with unexpected twists and turns.
Exactly. And that's where critical thinking comes in. We need to be able to assess the situation, to adapt our strategies, and not be afraid to try something new, something different.
It's almost like we need to embrace a bit of that David spirit, that willingness to face those giants, to fight for what we believe in, even when the odds seem, totally stacked against us.
And to remember that success, it doesn't always mean being the biggest, the strongest, or the richest, right? It's about finding your own unique path, using your strengths, and yet turning those perceived weaknesses into advantages.
It's really about redefining what success means for you, not letting society dictate, what you should be striving for. It's about figuring out what truly matters and going after it with everything you've got.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And I think that's especially relevant today, in a world that often feels so focused on status, on achievement. Gladwell is reminding us that true success, it comes from within, from aligning our actions with our values, our beliefs. It's about finding meaning and purpose.
And on that note, as we wrap up our deep dive into David and Goliath, I want to leave you with a question to think about. What perceived disadvantages in your own life might actually hold hidden potential? What challenges have you faced that might have actually shaped you into the person you are today?
Yeah, and how can you apply the lessons from this book to your own goals, your own journey? How can you embrace your unique strengths and turn those perceived weaknesses into advantages?
Because as Gladwell's shown us, sometimes those greatest victories, they come from the most unexpected places.